When the fire alarm shattered the silence of Mercy General Hospital at 2:17 a.m. on a Friday morning with a piercing wail that cut through empty corridors and sleeping rooms, and Jackson Bryant, the millionaire CEO of Bryant Medical Devices, trapped on the fifth floor surgical wing after a board meeting that had run past midnight, reviewing equipment contracts and quarterly projections, found himself surrounded by smoke filling the corridors, with suffocating thickness and flames consuming the main stairwell, with heat so intense he could feel it through the metal door, came face to face with Harper Reynolds, a 19-year-old girl covered in soot that blackened her face and hands, coughing violently with the wet, rattling sound that meant smoke had already invaded her lungs, who grabbed his expensive tailored suit jacket with fingers that trembled from fear and desperation, and said through tears that mixed with the ash on her cheeks, "My sister's in room 512. She's on a ventilator. She can't move by herself. She doesn't even know there's a fire. Please save her first. Don't worry about me. I'll be fine. Just please save Autumn first." He thought this was simple triage, that he could save both of them, that he'd carry the paralyzed sister to safety and come back for Harper before the smoke did permanent damage, that firefighters would arrive in time to make the impossible choice unnecessary. But it wasn't simple triage where trained professionals had equipment and backup and time to make calculated decisions about who needed help most urgently. It wasn't a situation where everyone survived because heroes arrived at the last moment, where the building held together long enough for rescue, where smoke cleared instead of thickening, where minutes stretched instead of collapsing into seconds that felt like heartbeats counting down to tragedy. It wasn't a choice that wouldn't haunt him forever, wasn't a decision that could be made with logic and protocol, and the detached calculation that had built his $500 million company wasn't something he could delegate or defer or revisit when he had more information. Because Harper Reynolds had minutes to live from smoke inhalation that was already turning her lips faintly blue, already making her breathing shallow and labored, already stealing oxygen from her blood in ways that meant unconsciousness was coming, whether she wanted it or not. But she insisted with the fierce desperation of someone who loved another person more than she loved her own survival that Jackson save her paralyzed sister Autumn first, that he prioritized the girl who couldn't move or breathe without machines over the girl who was mobile and conscious and begging. And when Jackson ran through smoke so thick he couldn't see his own hands toward room 512 and found Autumn strapped to monitors and tubes and machines, eyes wide with terror as smoke crept under the door and carried her fragile body through flames that singed his suit and burned his hands while Harper collapsed somewhere behind them in the hallway. What he did next would cost him everything he'd built through decades of ruthless focus and emotional distance, but would give him everything that actually mattered, everything his ex-wife had begged him to understand before she'd left, everything he'd been too consumed by quarterly earnings and market position to recognize until a 19-year-old girl chose her sister's life over her own and forced him to choose what kind of man he actually was beneath the expensive suits and corner office and reputation for never letting emotion interfere with business. If you believe that true love means sacrifice, that the greatest strength is choosing someone else's survival over your own, that putting others first isn't weakness but the purest form of courage, please like this video right now. Share it with someone who needs to see that selflessness is rewarded even when reward isn't the reason for choosing it. And comment below where you're watching from, because every like and share helps story about sacrifice and devotion reach people who need them, who are making impossible choices, who wonder if loving that deeply is worth the cost, who need to know that sometimes giving everything, is how you receive everything that actually matters. Jackson Bryant was 42 years old and had spent the last 20 years building Bryant Medical Devices from a startup with 3 employees into a $500 million company that manufactured surgical equipment sold to hospitals across 3 continents. Had sacrificed relationships and health and any semblance of work-life balance to prove that a kid from nothing could compete with Harvard MBAs and inherited wealth, had earned the CEO title through 16-hour days and calculated risks and an emotional detachment that his ex-wife had described during their final argument as pathological. She'd left him 2 years ago after 15 years of marriage, had packed her bags while he was at the office and left a note that said, "You only love your company. I'm tired of being less important than quarterly projections. I want a divorce." He'd read that note standing in their empty bedroom and had felt something that might have been grief but was quickly subsumed by the relief of not having to pretend anymore that he was capable of the kind of emotional availability she'd been begging for since their wedding day. They'd never had children. She'd wanted them desperately, but he'd insisted the timing wasn't right, that the company needed him, that maybe in 5 years when things stabilized, and she'd finally understood that 5 years would become 10, would become never, because work was the only thing he actually loved, the only place he felt competent and powerful and in control. He was a workaholic in the way that successful people are allowed to be, where dysfunction is rebranded as dedication, where emotional unavailability is celebrated as focus, where sacrificing everything personal for professional achievement is applauded by boards and investors and business magazines that profiled him as visionary leader, rather than damaged man using work to avoid feeling anything that might crack the fortress he'd built around whatever passed for his heart. He was at Mercy General Hospital at 2:17 a.m. on a Friday morning because he'd been in a late board meeting reviewing an equipment contract with the hospital's surgical department, had been going over profit margins and supply chains and pricing structures, while everyone else went home to families and lives that existed beyond spreadsheets. He'd been trapped when the fire started, had been alone in the 5th floor conference room, finishing notes when the alarm began screaming, had opened the door to find smoke already filling the corridor and flames visible at the far end where the main stairwell had apparently become an inferno, had felt the first flutter of real fear in decades because this was a problem he couldn't solve with money or strategy or the ruthless efficiency that made him successful in business, but utterly unprepared for any situation where success required something he'd forgotten how to access, which was basic human compassion. Harper and Autumn Reynolds were sisters separated by 3 years and united by tragedy that had remade both their lives 1 year ago when a drunk driver had run a red light and hit their parents' car with enough force to kill both adults instantly and leave Autumn paralyzed from the chest down, trapped in a body that no longer obeyed her brain's commands, dependent on machines and medications and constant care that their modest insurance and non-existent savings could never cover. Their parents had died in the accident that destroyed Autumn's mobility, had been gone before the ambulance arrived, had left Harper at 18 years old to become legal guardian of her 16-year-old sister, to figure out how to pay medical bills that accumulated faster than she could count them, to make choices no teenager should have to make about whether to pursue the college scholarship she'd earned or stay home to care for the sister who needed her more than any degree ever would. Harper was 19 now, should have been finishing her freshman year at State with a major in engineering and dreams of aerospace career, but instead worked 2 jobs as a waitress at a diner where the tips were decent if you smiled through harassment, and as a retail clerk at a mall store where standing for 8-hour shifts destroyed her feet and her faith in humanity. She paid medical bills with money that should have bought textbooks and tuition, spent her nights sleeping in a chair beside Autumn's hospital bed during treatment stays, sacrificed every dream she'd ever had because Autumn was her sister and their parents were gone, and someone had to show up, and Harper had always been the one who showed up, even when showing up cost everything. Autumn was 16 and paralyzed from a car accident that had stolen her mobility, but not her mind, was trapped in a body that required ventilator support during treatments for lung complications from the paralysis, was conscious and aware and terrified every time Harper left the room, because being unable to move made every moment feel like being buried alive. The accident had left her dependent on machines that breathed for her when her damaged lungs couldn't manage on their own, had left her watching her sister sacrifice everything to keep her alive, had left her feeling like a burden Harper carried with love, but carried nonetheless, had left her wondering if maybe everyone would be better off if she died in that accident instead of their parents who'd had whole lives ahead of them and hadn't been broken in ways that required hundreds of thousands of dollars in medical care. She was at Mercy General Hospital for overnight treatment, routine monitoring that insurance barely covered, lying in room 512 connected to monitors and tubes, and the ventilator that pushed air into lungs that couldn't quite do the job alone. With Harper sleeping in the uncomfortable chair beside her bed, the way Harper always did, because leaving Autumn alone overnight felt like abandonment, even though the nurses were competent and attentive, and Autumn insisted Harper should go home and sleep in an actual bed. Harper had stayed because staying was what Harper did, had dozed fitfully in that chair while Autumn slept more soundly than she had in months, had been dreaming of a life where medical bills didn't consume everything when the fire alarm started screaming. At 2:17 a.m. on a Friday morning, an electrical fire that had started in the basement of Mercy General Hospital from wiring that was 40 years old and had failed inspection twice, but hadn't been replaced because hospital budgets prioritized new surgical equipment over infrastructure, spread rapidly to the fifth-floor surgical wing through ventilation shafts and elevator shafts and all the hidden pathways that fire finds in old buildings, filled corridors with smoke that was thick and black and toxic, consumed the main stairwell with flames that made that exit impossible, triggered alarms that woke patients and sent nurses running, and initiated evacuation protocols that worked beautifully everywhere except the fifth floor where smoke was already too thick and fire had already cut off the primary escape route. The fifth floor was cut off within minutes, isolated by flames that blocked the stairwell and smoke that made navigation impossible, trapped everyone who'd been sleeping or working or visiting on that floor in a situation that went from routine to life-threatening faster than anyone trained for these scenarios had ever experienced. Jackson was trapped in the conference room after his board meeting, had been reviewing contracts when the alarm started, had opened the door to find his escape route consumed by fire and smoke. Harper and Autumn were trapped in room 512, had woken to alarms and smoke creeping under the door, had realized within seconds that Autumn couldn't be moved quickly, that the ventilator couldn't be disconnected without suffocating her, that they were trapped in a room filling with smoke, and Harper had to decide whether to run for help or stay with her sister while they both died. And she'd chosen to run, had kissed Autumn's forehead and promised she'd come back with help, had stumbled into the smoke-filled corridor looking for anyone who could help her save the sister she'd already sacrificed everything to keep alive. Would you stay with someone you loved in a burning building, or would you run for help knowing you might not make it back in time? Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. At 2:20 a.m., 3 minutes after the fire alarm had begun its relentless screaming, and 2 minutes after Jackson had discovered that his primary escape route was consumed by flames that roared with the hungry intensity of something alive and malicious, He was trying to find an exit through smoke so thick it felt solid, like pushing through dark water that burned his throat and lungs with every desperate breath. Moving along the corridor wall, with one hand pressed against painted concrete, because losing contact with the wall meant losing all orientation in the suffocating blackness. The smoke was thick enough that he couldn't see his own hand when he held it inches from his face. Thick enough that breathing required conscious effort. Thick enough that he understood with the clarity that comes from genuine terror that he had minutes, not hours, before unconsciousness claimed him and fire claimed whatever remained. He heard coughing nearby, wet and rattling and desperate, the sound of lungs trying to expel poison that had already invaded too deeply. Heard it coming from somewhere to his left. Moved toward it because any sound meant another person, and another person meant he wasn't dying alone in this smoke-filled corridor. Found Harper Reynolds crawling on hands and knees along the floor where air was slightly less toxic. Found this 19-year-old girl covered in soot that blackened her face and hands, and the ratty college sweatshirt she'd been sleeping in, barely conscious with eyes that struggled to focus, and breathing that sounded like each inhale might be her last. She was pointing toward a door with trembling fingers, pointing with the desperate insistence of someone who had one message left to deliver before consciousness abandoned them entirely, pointing at room 512 with a brass number plate that was barely visible through the smoke. Jackson knelt beside her, got close enough that he could see the blue tint forming around her lips, the particular color that meant oxygen deprivation was already damaging her brain, the color that meant she had minutes before the damage became permanent or she stopped breathing altogether. Jackson's mind processed the situation with the systematic assessment that had made him successful in business, cataloging facts with brutal efficiency, even as panic tried to override logic with the primal scream that said, "Run, save yourself. You can't help anyone if you're dead." The fire was spreading fast. He could hear it now over the alarms, could hear the roar of flames consuming everything flammable, could feel the heat increasing even through the smoke that surrounded them. The smoke was getting thicker by the second, was already at the level where every breath felt like inhaling ground glass, where his lungs were screaming for clean air that didn't exist, where he could feel his own consciousness starting to fray at the edges. Minutes until firefighters arrived, he'd heard the sirens starting as he'd left the conference room. Knew that help was coming, but didn't know if help would arrive before the smoke killed them, or the fire reached this floor, or the building structure failed. This girl was dying right in front of him. He didn't need medical training to see that. Could see it in the color of her lips and the shallow, rapid breathing and the way her eyes couldn't quite focus. Could see that she had 5 minutes, maybe less, before smoke inhalation did permanent damage or stopped her breathing entirely. She was pointing to a room which meant someone else must be there, someone she cared about enough to use her last conscious moments directing a stranger toward them. Someone who mattered more to her than her own survival. He could save one person, maybe two if he was fast and lucky and the building held together long enough. But time was running out with every second he spent making decisions instead of taking action. Whoever he chose first, the other might not survive the wait, might die while he was carrying the first person to safety, might be dead by the time he came back through smoke that was thickening and fire that was spreading and time that was collapsing. This was life or death, not abstract philosophical exercise, but actual immediate choice between who lived and who died. And he had to decide now because in 30 seconds, the girl in front of him might be unconscious, and in 60 seconds, she might be dead. At 2:22 a.m., 4 minutes into the crisis that was remaking Jackson's understanding of what actually mattered in life, Harper grabbed his expensive suit jacket with fingers that had no strength left but somehow found the will to grip the fabric, pulled him close enough that he could smell the smoke on her breath and see the tears cutting tracks through the soot on her cheeks. "Room 512, she gasped, each word requiring effort that cost her oxygen she couldn't spare. "My sister. She's paralyzed, can't move her legs or her arms, strapped to a bed that might as well be a coffin if no one helps her. On a ventilator, needs the machine to breathe. Can't survive without it. Can't disconnect it herself. Can't even know there's a fire unless someone tells her." "She doesn't know there's a fire," Harper repeated, the statement breaking something inside Jackson, because it meant a girl was lying in that room breathing smoke and wondering why alarms were screaming and having no way to save herself, no way to even understand what was happening. "I'll get you both," Jackson said, the promise automatic, the kind of thing people say in disasters because acknowledging that you can't save everyone feels like admitting defeat before you've even tried. "No," Harper said, the word sharp despite her failing lungs, definitive despite the smoke that was stealing her consciousness. "Save her first." The command wasn't a request, wasn't negotiable, wasn't open to discussion or compromise. "Please," Harper continued, the word cracking, "I'm begging you, use whatever time you have to get her out. Don't waste time on me. I can wait. She can't. Don't let her die alone and scared. Don't let her last moments be lying in that bed unable to move while fire consumes the building. Don't let her die without knowing someone tried." Jackson's realization hit him with the force of physical blow, reordered his understanding of human nature in the space between heartbeats. She was choosing her sister over herself, was using her last conscious moments to advocate for someone else's survival, was dying from smoke inhalation that was probably already past the point of reversal, but insisting that Jackson save Autumn first, that he prioritized the paralyzed girl who couldn't save herself over the mobile girl who was begging him to let her die if that's what it took to save her sister. This was pure love, not the abstract concept discussed in wedding vows and greeting cards, but the actual lived reality of loving someone more than you loved your own survival, of making the choice that meant you might die, but they might live, and deciding that was acceptable mathematics. Selfless sacrifice not performed for audience or reward or recognition, but executed in smoke-filled corridor where the only witness was a stranger who would remember forever the moment someone chose death so their sister could live. Harper might not survive the wait, probably wouldn't survive if he took the time to rescue Autumn first, would be dead or brain damaged by the time he came back for her. But she didn't care because Autumn's survival mattered more than her own, because being a sister meant protecting even when protecting cost everything. At 2:24 a.m., 6 minutes into the fire and 2 minutes after Harper had begged him to save her sister first, Jackson ran toward room 512 with smoke burning his lungs and heat searing his skin and Harper's collapsed body behind him in the hallway, where she might already be dying. He found Autumn Reynolds strapped to a hospital bed with monitors beeping and tubes running to machines, and the ventilator pushing air into lungs that couldn't manage the task alone. Found this 16-year-old girl conscious and terrified with eyes that went wide when he crashed through the door. Eyes that asked 1,000 questions she couldn't voice because the ventilator tube prevented speech. She couldn't move. Her arms lay motionless on the bed despite what must have been desperate attempts to reach for the call button or the bed rails or anything that might help her escape. Couldn't speak around the ventilator tube that filled her mouth and throat. Could only watch with mounting horror as smoke crept under the door and alarms screamed, and this stranger in an expensive suit appeared like an answer to prayers she'd been screaming silently since the alarm started. Her eyes were wide with fear that came from understanding she was trapped, from knowing that everyone else could run, but she could only lie here and wait for rescue or death, from the particular terror of being conscious and aware while completely helpless. Jackson disconnected the ventilator with hands that shook from adrenaline and smoke inhalation. Tried to remember the training from some long-ago corporate safety seminar, knew that disconnecting meant she'd have minutes of air in her lungs, but after that would need rescue breathing or would suffocate. He lifted her carefully, was startled by how light she was, how fragile. This teenager who weighed maybe 90 pounds and felt like lifting a child, felt like holding something infinitely breakable that had already been broken once and couldn't survive being broken again. He ran back toward the corridor, toward Harper who was dying, toward the window that might offer escape, toward choices that were all terrible because there were no good options left. At 2:26 a.m., 8 minutes into the fire and 4 minutes after Harper had begged him to save her sister first, Jackson found Harper unconscious in the hallway where he'd left her, found her lying motionless with lips that had gone from blue tinge to fully blue, with breathing that had stopped or slowed to the point of irrelevance, with the stillness that meant either unconsciousness or death, and he couldn't tell which. He was carrying Autumn, who was conscious and watching everything, with eyes that understood exactly what was happening, who could see her sister lying unconscious and couldn't speak around the ventilator tube, but was screaming silently for him to help Harper, to save both of them, to not let Harper die because she'd insisted on Autumn first. He could only carry one person at a time. His arms were full of Autumn's fragile body, and smoke was stealing his strength, and he was running out of time before his own lungs failed. Firefighters were still 2 minutes away. He could hear the sirens getting closer, but 2 minutes might as well be 2 hours when measured against how long Harper had before brain death, when measured against how long before the fire reached this corridor, when measured against how long before the building structure failed and killed everyone still inside. He had to choose again, had to make the impossible decision that Harper had already made for him. Keep going with Autumn toward the window that offered fresh air and possible rescue, or go back for Harper, who might already be dead, who Harper herself had insisted should be secondary priority, who had begged him to save Autumn first, even if saving Autumn first meant Harper died. Harper had said, save her first, had made him promise to prioritize Autumn, had used her last conscious moments to ensure her sister survived even if she didn't. But Harper would die if he didn't go back now, was probably dying already, was certainly dead if he spent another 30 seconds carrying Autumn to safety before returning for her. Jackson made his decision in the heartbeat between breaths, made the choice that would define who he actually was beneath the CEO title and the emotional detachment in the ex-wife's accusation that he only loved his company. He set Autumn down near a window where smoke was thinner, where fresh air was leaking in through cracks in the old glass, where she had minutes of oxygen left in her lungs and a chance of survival if firefighters arrived soon. I'm coming back for you, he said to Autumn, even though she couldn't respond. Even though her eyes went wide with terror at being left alone, even though setting her down felt like abandoning her and might mean she died if he didn't make it back. He ran back through smoke that was now so thick he was moving blind, ran back toward Harper with lungs that felt like they were filled with shattered glass. Ran back because Harper had chosen her sister, but Jackson was choosing both of them, was refusing to accept that saving one meant abandoning the other, was making the impossible choice that said maybe he'd die trying, but at least he'd die trying instead of living with the knowledge that he'd let a 19-year-old girl die alone, because following her instructions was easier than going back. He could barely breathe now. Each inhale was agony. Each step felt like the last one his legs could manage before collapsing. But he found Harper where he'd left her, lifted her limp body that was even lighter than Autumn's, staggered back toward the window where he'd left Autumn, moved through smoke that had stolen his vision and his breath and possibly his consciousness because the edges of the world were going dark. He collapsed with Harper at the window just as firefighters broke through the glass from the outside. Just as fresh air rushed in and hands reached for them, just as consciousness abandoned him completely, and he fell into darkness, knowing he'd done the only thing that mattered, which was refusing to choose. Refusing to let either sister die. Refusing to be the kind of man who could live with himself after making the practical decision that saved one life by sacrificing another. At 2:35 a.m., 18 minutes after the fire alarm had first shattered the silence, and 13 minutes after Jackson had collapsed at the window with Harper in his arms, firefighters had extracted everyone from the 5th floor through windows and emergency exits that required ladders and harnesses, and the kind of coordinated rescue effort that looked chaotic, but was actually precisely choreographed chaos, born from years of training for disasters exactly like this. Both girls were alive. That fact alone felt like miracle in a night that had offered very few. Both breathing with help from oxygen and machines and the desperate intervention of paramedics who'd worked on them in the ambulance. Jackson was unconscious from smoke inhalation that had damaged his lungs in ways that would take weeks to heal, was intubated and sedated and hospitalized overnight in the same building he'd nearly died inside. His expensive suit cut away by emergency room staff who didn't care about Italian tailoring when they were trying to save a life. Harper was in critical condition in the ICU, had stopped breathing twice in the ambulance, had been revived both times by paramedics who'd later tell each other they'd never seen someone fight that hard to stay alive, was now on a ventilator in the same unit where Autumn had been before the fire, connected to machines that breathed for her while her damaged lungs tried to remember how. Autumn was stable, relatively speaking, was back on her own ventilator after firefighters had reconnected it in the ambulance, was conscious and terrified and asking questions with her eyes that no one could answer because the only person who mattered to her was lying 3 rooms away dying, and no one would tell her if Harper was going to survive. Jackson was hospitalized overnight, would wake the next morning with lungs that felt shredded and a headache from oxygen deprivation, and absolutely no memory of the last few minutes before he'd collapsed. Would wake to discover he'd done something his ex-wife had always insisted he was incapable of, which was putting someone else's needs before his own survival. The next morning arrived with the pale tentative light that follows disasters, the kind of dawn that feels apologetic. Like even the sun isn't sure it should show up after a night when fire tried to consume everything. Jackson woke in a hospital room that was too bright and too quiet, woke with an oxygen mask pressed against his face and tubes running into his arms, and the particular disorientation that comes from not remembering how you arrived at your current location. A doctor stood at his bedside, older man with kind eyes and the calm demeanor of someone who delivered both terrible news and miraculous news so many times that his face had learned to hold steady regardless of which message he was carrying. "You're a hero," the doctor said, the words landing strange and uncomfortable because Jackson had never been called a hero in 42 years of life, had been called brilliant and ruthless and visionary, but never hero, because heroes sacrifice for others, and Jackson had spent 2 decades sacrificing others for his company's success. "You saved both girls," the doctor continued. "Saved them when saving both should have been impossible, when the math of time and smoke and fire said you had to choose one or lose both. But somehow you refused to choose, and somehow you all survived. But you almost died," the doctor added, "because apparently miraculous rescues still required someone to acknowledge the cost. You came within minutes of permanent lung damage. within seconds of not waking up at all. The older girl, Jackson interrupted, his voice rough from smoke damage and the ventilator tube they'd removed an hour before he woke. Harper, is she? And he couldn't finish the question because finishing it meant acknowledging she might be dead, might have died while he was unconscious, might have sacrificed herself for Autumn and then died anyway because Jackson had been too slow coming back for her. Critical condition, the doctor said carefully, the two words carrying more weight than their syllables suggested. We don't know yet if she'll recover fully, don't know if the smoke damage to her lungs is permanent, don't know if she'll need a ventilator long-term or if her lungs will heal. We don't know yet, and that uncertainty hung in the air between them like smoke that hadn't quite cleared. Jackson visited Autumn's room later that morning, still connected to portable oxygen, still moving slowly because his lungs protested every deep breath, still processing the fact that he'd nearly died and had apparently chosen to nearly die rather than let Harper die, which was behavior so foreign to his normal decision-making process that he couldn't quite reconcile it with who he'd always believed himself to be. Autumn was conscious and crying, tears running silently down her face because crying made noise, and noise required breath control, and breath control was something her damaged body had surrendered, was crying in the particular way that paralyzed people cry when grief overwhelms the physical limitations that usually contain emotion. She had a communication board propped beside her bed, one of those low-tech assistive devices with letters and common phrases that she could indicate by moving her eyes in patterns the nurses had learned to read, was spelling out a question letter by letter with the desperate focus of someone who needed an answer more than she needed anything else. "Where is Harper?" the board read. The question assembled one eye movement at a time, each letter requiring effort and patience, and the kind of determination that came from loving someone enough to fight through paralysis to ask about them. "She's fighting," Jackson said, sitting in the chair beside her bed, the same chair Harper had slept in the night before the fire, the same chair that Harper had occupied for countless nights over the past year because leaving Autumn alone felt like abandonment. "Because of her, you're alive," Jackson continued, "because Harper used her last conscious moments to tell me where you were, to make me promise to save you first, to choose your survival over her own." Autumn's eyes moved across the communication board, spelling out her next question with tears still streaming. "She told you to save me first," the board eventually read, statement and question simultaneously. Jackson nodded, his own throat tight with emotion he wasn't accustomed to feeling, much less expressing. "That's Harper," Autumn spelled out, the words coming faster now as if she'd been storing them up for someone who would finally understand. "Always me first, always my needs before her needs, always choosing my survival over her comfort. She gave up college for me, gave up her dreams for me, works 2 jobs she hates to pay my medical bills, sleeps in that chair because she won't leave me alone overnight, and now she almost died because she told you to save me and leave her." Jackson's investigation into the Reynolds sisters' story came gradually over the next 2 days, pieced together from social workers and nurses, and eventually from Autumn herself using the communication board that made conversation agonizingly slow, but infinitely precious because every word was chosen deliberately when choosing required that much effort. He learned that their parents had died in a car accident 1 year ago, that a drunk driver had run a red light and hit their car with enough force to kill both adults instantly, that the same accident had left Autumn paralyzed from the chest down, with injuries that would require lifetime care and astronomical medical expenses. He learned that Harper had become Autumn's legal guardian at 18 years old, had signed papers and made decisions and assumed responsibility that most adults twice her age would have found overwhelming, had dropped out of college 3 weeks into her freshman year, when she'd realized that being 4 hours away meant Autumn was alone with paid caregivers who did their jobs competently but didn't love her, didn't understand that Autumn needed her sister more than she needed another stranger rotating through 8-hour shifts. He learned that Harper worked 2 jobs, waitressing at a diner where the tips were decent if you tolerated harassment, and retail at a mall store where standing for 8 hours destroyed her feet and her faith that people were fundamentally good. Worked those jobs to pay medical bills that had accumulated to $400,000 in 1 year. He learned they lived in a 1-room apartment because that's what Harper could afford on 2 jobs that paid minimum wage plus tips, that Harper slept on a couch that doubled as Autumn's hospital bed, that their entire lives existed in 400 square feet of space that smelled like medical supplies and regret for the life they'd had before a drunk driver had destroyed everything. He learned that Harper's entire life had become Autumn in the years since the accident, that every decision and every sacrifice and every choice about work and sleep and food and the future had been filtered through the single question of what would keep Autumn alive and as comfortable as possible, and protected from feeling like the burden she clearly believed herself to be. The hospital administrator visited Jackson's room on day 2. A thin, nervous man carrying a clipboard that contained information Jackson had been expecting since he learned the Reynolds sisters had no insurance. The Reynolds sisters have no insurance, the administrator said, the statement apologetic as if their poverty was something he'd personally caused. Have nothing beyond the minimal Medicaid that covers some of the paralysis care, but doesn't cover fires or ICU stays or the kind of intensive treatment Harper needs. The fire, the ICU, the treatments, smoke inhalation care, ventilator time, the medications and monitoring, and all the specialists we've had to bring in, the administrator continued, adding up numbers like he was reciting a grocery list rather than potentially bankrupting 2 teenagers who'd already lost everything. It'll be over $200,000. The administrator finished. The number dropped like a stone into water, creating ripples that would drown the Reynolds sisters in debt they could never repay. We'll have to send it to collections, the administrator added, apologetic but firm, because apparently the policy was to save lives first and destroy them financially second. No, you won't, Jackson said, the words arriving before he'd consciously decided to speak them, arriving from someplace inside him that his ex-wife had always insisted existed beneath a CEO exterior, but that he'd never been able to access until a 19-year-old girl had taught him what love actually looked like. Send the bills to me, Jackson continued, voice steady despite lungs that protested speaking. All of them, every dollar they owe from the fire, and from before the fire. Send me the $400,000 in medical debt they've accumulated. Send me everything because these girls are not going to spend the rest of their lives drowning in debt accumulated from trying to survive tragedies they didn't cause. Harper woke on day 3, regained consciousness slowly, like someone swimming up from deep water, opened her eyes with the confusion of someone who'd been dreaming and couldn't quite remember if they were supposed to be alive or dead. Her first word was Autumn, spoken through damaged vocal cords that made her voice rough and raw, spoken before she'd oriented to where she was or what had happened, spoken because Autumn's survival mattered more than understanding her own situation. She's alive, Jackson said from the chair beside her bed, where he'd been sitting for 2 hours waiting for her to wake. The same chair Harper had occupied beside Autumn's bed the night of the fire. Because of you, because you told me where she was, because you chose her survival over your own. Harper started crying, Tears that mixed with the oxygen mask pressed against her face. Tears that came from relief and grief and the overwhelming crash of emotion that happens when you've been holding yourself together through crisis and finally have permission to fall apart. "You went back for me," Harper said through tears, the statement carrying disbelief and wonder and something that might have been guilt. "I told you to save her first, told you to leave me if you had to, told you her life mattered more than mine." "I saved her first," Jackson confirmed. The truth important because Harper needed to know he'd honored her request, needed to know that Autumn's survival wasn't an accident, but the direct result of Harper's sacrifice. "Then I came back for you," Jackson continued, "because leaving you to die wasn't something I could live with. I couldn't let you die, not after watching you choose your sister, not after seeing what love actually looks like when it's not just something people say, but something they do even when doing it costs everything." "But you don't even know us," Harper said, the confusion genuine, the disbelief understandable, because strangers didn't sacrifice for each other, didn't risk death for people they'd met in smoke-filled corridors, didn't go back through flames for teenagers they had no obligation to save. "I know enough," Jackson replied, leaning forward so she could see his face clearly through the oxygen mask and the tears. "I know you chose your sister over yourself when most people would have chosen survival. I know you worked 2 jobs to keep her alive when you should have been in college. I know you sacrificed everything for someone you love, and that's all I need to know to understand that you deserve help, deserve someone to choose you for once, deserve to not carry this alone." "Your medical bills are paid," Jackson said, delivering the news like it was simple fact rather than life-changing intervention. "Both of you, everything from the fire and everything from before the fire, the $400,000 in accumulated debt, it's paid. You don't owe anything." Harper stared at him, trying to process words that didn't make sense, trying to reconcile stranger with savior, trying to understand why someone would do this. "I can't," Harper started, the protest automatic even through tears. "That's too much. I can't accept. We can't repay. It's too much money." "There's more," Jackson interrupted, "because apparently once you started giving away your wealth to teenagers who taught you what actually mattered in life, you couldn't stop. I have a position at my company, administrative assistant, $65,000 annually, full health insurance that will cover both you and Autumn with no exclusions for pre-existing conditions, flexible hours so you can care for Autumn and still have a career, benefits that start immediately and continue for as long as you work there." "Why would you do this?" Harper asked, the question carrying the weight of someone who'd learned that nothing came free, that generosity always had strings attached, that rich people didn't help poor people without expecting something in return. "Because 2 years ago my wife left me," Jackson said, the confession coming easier than he'd expected, the truth something he apparently needed to speak as much as Harper needed to hear it. "She said I only love my company, said I was incapable of loving anything that didn't show up on a balance sheet, said I'd chosen wealth over relationships so many times that I'd forgotten how to choose people. She was right. I've spent my life building wealth and ignoring everyone who tried to tell me that wealth wasn't the same thing as worth, that success in business didn't equal success in life, that having everything material meant nothing if you had nothing emotional. But watching you choose your sister, watching you use your last conscious moments to ensure she survived even if you didn't, watching you sacrifice yourself without hesitation or calculation or expectation of reward. You taught me what love actually looks like when it's not abstract concept but lived reality. And I want to help you keep her alive, want to give you the resources to care for Autumn without destroying yourself, want to be part of something that matters more than quarterly earnings and market share. And all the things I've spent 42 years believing were important, but that turned out to be completely meaningless when measured against one teenager choosing her sister's survival over her own. 6 months after the fire that had nearly killed all three of them, after Harper's lungs had slowly healed from smoke damage that doctors had initially feared would require permanent ventilator support, after Jackson had been discharged and had spent 2 weeks recovering in his empty townhouse before realizing that empty houses felt different after you'd nearly died, saving strangers who'd become the most important people in your life, Harper was working for Jackson's company as an administrative assistant, earning $65,000 annually, which represented more money than she'd made in 3 years of working 2 minimum wage jobs combined, with health insurance that covered Autumn completely, with no exclusions for pre-existing conditions and no lifetime maximum that would bankrupt them before Autumn turned 20. They'd moved to an accessible apartment that Jackson had helped find, had helped pay the deposit for, because apparently once you started helping, you discovered that stopping felt wrong. An apartment with wider doorways and a roll-in shower and ramps instead of steps and all the modifications that made Autumn's life possible instead of just survivable. Autumn was in rehabilitation therapy 5 times a week, was slowly regaining sensation in her legs that doctors had insisted would never return, was proving that sometimes the body could heal beyond what medical textbooks predicted when someone loved you enough to work through pain that made grown men quit. Harper took Autumn to every physical therapy session, sat beside her through exercises that made Autumn cry, and through small victories that made Harper cry, documented progress in a journal that was half medical record and half love letter to the sister who was fighting so hard to reclaim the mobility that a drunk driver had stolen. Jackson often joined them after work, would leave the office early to sit in physical therapy, waiting rooms, reading emails on his phone while Autumn worked through exercises, would drive them home afterward and stay for dinner in the apartment he'd helped them find, had become something like family without anyone quite acknowledging, when stranger had transformed into friend, had transformed into something that felt permanent in ways none of them had language to describe yet. Harper and Jackson were working closely at the company, her desk positioned near his office so he could answer questions and she could learn the business. Were spending 8 hours daily in proximity that created friendship in the way shared space and shared purpose always creates connection. Were discovering they liked each other beyond the crisis that had introduced them, that Harper was smart and funny when she wasn't drowning in medical debt and fear, that Jackson was kind and thoughtful when he wasn't hiding behind the CEO persona that had protected him from feeling anything for 2 decades. Friendship was forming between people who should have remained strangers, but who'd been welded together by fire and sacrifice and the shared experience of choosing someone else's survival over their own comfort. Autumn's progress accelerated in ways that stunned her medical team, was regaining movement in her toes, first then her ankles, then her knees, was able to shift her weight and bear load and eventually stand with assistance, was doing things that paralyzed teenagers weren't supposed to do, because apparently love and determination and access to 5 times weekly physical therapy could accomplish what medical textbooks said was impossible. Physical therapy became the center of their lives. Harper's work schedule built around Autumn's sessions, Jackson's evenings planned around driving them home, all 3 of them organizing their existence around the incremental progress that meant Autumn might walk again, might reclaim independence, might have a future that wasn't defined entirely by what she couldn't do. 1 year after the fire, after 12 months of physical therapy and incremental progress and setbacks that felt devastating until the next breakthrough arrived, Autumn took her first steps with a walker took actual steps where her legs moved in response to her brain's commands, and her feet bore her weight, and she moved forward through space under her own power for the first time since a car accident had stolen that ability. Harper was crying, Jackson was crying, the physical therapist was crying, everyone in the rehabilitation center was crying, because witnessing someone reclaim what they lost felt like watching miracle unfold in real time. "You did it, Autumn," Harper sobbed, unable to contain joy that was mixed with relief and pride, and the overwhelming gratitude of watching her sister prove that sacrificing everything had been worth it because Autumn was actually walking. "We did it," Autumn corrected, breathless from effort but grinning with triumph that lit her entire face. "All of us, because I don't walk without Harper giving up college to take me to therapy, without Jackson paying for therapy I couldn't afford, without both of you believing I could do this when doctors said I couldn't, we did this together." Jackson's life had changed in ways that quarterly earnings and board meetings couldn't capture, had reduced his work hours from 80 per week to 50, then to 40, had started leaving the office at 5 p.m. to spend evenings with Harper and Autumn, had discovered that success measured in relationships felt different than success measured in revenue, that being present for dinner and therapy sessions and quiet evenings watching Autumn practice walking created satisfaction that closing deals had never generated. His relationship with Harper had evolved from employer and employee to friends to something more that neither of them had named yet, but that felt inevitable in the way that spending every evening together and building a life around Autumn's recovery created intimacy that transcended initial circumstances. "I never thought," Harper said one evening after Autumn had gone to bed, "never thought I'd have this. Have someone who shows up not because they're paid to, but because they choose to. Have someone who sees Autumn as family, not as burden. Have someone who changed our entire lives without expecting anything in return." "Neither did I," Jackson replied, voice quiet with the wonder of someone discovering themselves capable of emotions they'd believed were beyond their capacity. "Never thought I'd meet someone who taught me what matters, who showed me that love is action, not abstraction, who made me want to be different, better, the kind of person who goes back through fire because leaving someone behind isn't acceptable. But you showed me what matters," Jackson continued. "Show me that wealth means nothing if you're too emotionally bankrupt to share it with people who need help. That success in business is meaningless if you fail at being human." 18 months after the fire, after Autumn was walking independently with just a cane for balance, and Harper had been promoted to executive assistant with a salary increase, and Jackson had learned that emotional availability wasn't weakness, but the foundation of everything that made life worth living. Jackson proposed to Harper at Mercy General Hospital in the corridor outside room 512, where their lives had intersected, where Harper had begged him to save her sister first, where everything had changed in smoke-filled darkness. "You saved me that night," Jackson said, holding a ring that represented commitment he'd never thought himself capable of making. "Saved me more than I saved you because you taught me what love looks like when it's not convenient or comfortable or calculated, when it costs everything and expects nothing in return." Autumn was in her wheelchair beside them because apparently proposals required the sister who'd made everything possible, was crying and laughing and saying, "Say yes, Harper. Say yes because he went back for you when I thought you told him not to. Because he chose both of us when he could have chosen just one. Because he learned to love us the way we love each other." Harper said yes through tears that meant relief and joy, and the overwhelming gratitude of someone who'd been drowning and had been rescued and had discovered that rescue could transform into family, could transform into love. The wedding was small ceremony 6 months later, intimate gathering of people who mattered, with Autumn as maid of honor walking down the aisle with her walker, because walking down the aisle mattered more than walking perfectly, with everyone crying because witnessing Autumn walk felt like watching all the sacrifice in therapy and love manifest in physical form. "None of this happens without you," Harper told Autumn during the reception. "None of this happens if you don't survive the fire, if Jackson doesn't go back, if we don't learn to be family." "None of this happens without him going back," Autumn replied. "Happens without him refusing to choose, without him teaching both of us that we're worth saving even when we don't believe it ourselves." 2 years after the fire, after Jackson and Harper had been married for 18 months and Autumn had started college pursuing pre-med degree, "Because I want to save people the way you saved us," they returned to Mercy General Hospital that had been renovated with fire safety improvements that Jackson had funded, that now included the Reynolds Wing named after Harper and Autumn's parents who died in the car accident that had started everything. The wing was dedicated to trauma recovery and rehabilitation, was equipped with physical therapy facilities and medical equipment, and all the resources that could help other families survive tragedies the way the Reynolds sisters had survived theirs. Jackson had funded the renovations as memorial to the night that had changed his life, had insisted the wing be named after Harper and Autumn's parents because they had raised daughters who understood sacrifice, who taught him through their example what love actually meant when stripped of abstraction and measured in choices made when choosing was hardest. Harper and Jackson stood with Autumn, who was walking independently now, with just a slight limp that reminded her daily of what she'd survived. With Autumn starting college and pursuing medicine, and proving that surviving tragedy could become purpose, could become calling, could become the foundation for helping others survive their own tragedies. "I want to save people like you saved us," Autumn had told Jackson when she declared her major. "Want to be the person who shows up in someone's darkest moment and refuses to let them die alone. Want to learn medicine not because it pays well, but because knowing how to save lives feels like the most important knowledge anyone can possess." "You went back for me," Harper said to Jackson as they stood in the Reynolds Wing watching Autumn talk to reporters about the renovation. "Went back when I'd told you to save her first, when saving her first meant leaving me to die, when every logical calculation said you couldn't save both." "I couldn't leave you," Jackson replied. "Couldn't live with myself after watching you choose your sister. Couldn't be the kind of man who follows instructions that means someone dies when there's still a chance to save them." "You taught me that love means sacrifice," Jackson continued. "Means choosing someone else's survival over your own comfort. Means risking everything for someone who can't repay you. Means going back through fire because leaving people behind isn't acceptable when you have the capacity to help. And I learned it's worth everything. Learned that the wealth I spent 42 years accumulating means nothing compared to the family I found in a smoke-filled corridor. Learned that saving you in Autumn saved me from the empty life I'd been living. Learned that sacrifice is how you prove love is real and not just something people say when it's convenient." "Both of you saved me," Autumn said, turning from the reporters to join them. "Saved me by saving each other, by refusing to choose, by teaching me that I'm worth saving even when I don't believe it, by building family from crisis, by showing me that tragedy doesn't have to be the end, but can be the beginning if people choose love over logic." When the fire alarm shattered the silence at 2:17 a.m. and Jackson Bryant found Harper Reynolds dying in smoke-filled corridors, begging him to save her paralyzed sister first, to leave her behind if necessary, to prioritize Autumn's life over her own, because that's what love meant to Harper, sacrificing herself so Autumn could live. He thought this was simple triage, that heroes in real life saved everyone the way heroes in movies did, that choices between who lives and who dies only existed in fiction, that surely he could rescue both girls before fire or smoke made choosing necessary. But Harper collapsed before his eyes after showing him where Autumn was. After using her last conscious moments to ensure her sister's survival, and Jackson had to choose in the seconds between her collapse and his own death from smoke inhalation. Keep running with the paralyzed girl he'd just rescued toward fresh air and possible survival. Or go back through flames for the sister who'd insisted she didn't matter as much, who'd begged him to save Autumn first, even if saving Autumn first meant Harper died alone in smoke-filled corridor. He went back, almost died going back through smoke that stole his consciousness and fire that burned his hands and destroyed his expensive suit. Carried Harper to safety after securing Autumn near a window where fresh air kept her alive. Because Harper had taught him in 2 minutes what his ex-wife couldn't teach him in 15 years of marriage. That love means sacrifice. That putting others first isn't weakness, but the purest strength. That wealth means nothing if you're not willing to risk everything for someone who can't repay you. That being human means going back even when going back might kill you, because leaving people to die when you could save them destroys something essential that no amount of money can restore. And when Harper woke 3 days later, asking about her sister before asking about herself, proving that even near death couldn't change her priorities or make her choose herself over Autumn. When Jackson paid $200,000 in medical bills without hesitation because money was just numbers, but Harper and Autumn were actual humans who deserved help. When he offered her a job that became a future, that became a family, that became marriage and fatherhood to Autumn, and a life built on the foundation of that night when fire forced him to decide what kind of man he actually was beneath the CEO facade. He wasn't playing hero or buying redemption or trying to erase guilt through charitable giving. He was learning to love the way Harper had loved Autumn from the moment she'd begged him to save her sister first, completely, selflessly, with the kind of fierce devotion that says save them first. Even when saving them means losing yourself, with the understanding that sacrifice is how love proves itself real, with the certainty that some choices cost everything, but give you everything that actually matters. If this story reminded you that real love means sacrifice, that putting others first is strength, not weakness, that the people who save us often need saving themselves, then you understand why stories like this need to reach beyond the screen to touch people who are drowning in their own crises, who wonder if anyone would go back for them, who need to know that selfless love still exists in a world that often rewards selfishness. Would you sacrifice yourself to save your sibling? Would you beg a stranger to save them first, even if it meant you died? Would you go back through fire for someone who told you to leave them behind? Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and rate this story from 0 to 10. Because your engagement helps us know that messages about sacrifice and devotion and the transformative power of choosing others over yourself matter to you enough to share them with people who desperately need to hear them.